Richard Harrington froze at the sight. Too small. Black boys placing sunflowers on his late wife Catherine's grave. "Happy birthday, Mommy," they whispered in unison. His manicured hands trembled. It couldn't be, these children his, but the letter in his pocket burned like truth. "They are yours, Richard." Before we dive into this powerful story of love, betrayal, and redemption, tell us where you're watching from. Hit like if your life has ever changed in an instant, and subscribe for more stories that stay with you. Richard stepped into his $15 million Manhattan penthouse, Italian leather shoes echoing on marble. Catherine had designed the space, now a frozen tribute to the life they built childless, by his decision. He had denied her adoption. "The Harrington legacy isn't built on handouts," he once said coldly over dinner. Now he poured the scotch, but it did little to quiet the memory of those boys. Catherine, the only person who ever truly saw him, had died 2 years ago of ovarian cancer. And yet this letter, delivered that morning in her handwriting, shattered everything. If you're reading this, you've met our sons. Catherine had quietly visited a fertility clinic. She had chosen a black donor with brilliance and strength, not in spite of Richard's prejudices, but to challenge them. "I wanted our children to make you better than your father ever allowed you to be." Anger surged, but so did disbelief. Could this be real? Could she have done this without him? His phone rang. Marcus Bennett, his coup, warning about a hostile takeover. Richard snapped back into his corporate armor. The letter vanished into his pocket. He would deal with it later. And yet, the boys had her eyes. Eyes he couldn't forget. They had laid sunflowers on Catherine's grave, her favorite. Only Richard and a few close friends would know that. As he prepared for his emergency board meeting, one question haunted him. What if Catherine had given him exactly what he wanted? Heirs. And he missed the first 7 years, because of his own prejudice. 3 days later, Richard met Jackson Miller, a former FBI agent turned private investigator, in a private room at the Harvard Club. The air still held traces of old cigars and quiet power. "I need to know everything about these children," Richard said, sliding over a photo he had taken at the cemetery. Miller didn't ask why. He never did. "You'll have a report by tomorrow." He delivered. The boys Elijah and Ethan Williams, age 7, lived in Harlem with their grandmother, Loretta. Their birth certificates listed no father. The mother, Catherine Harrington Williams. The address was tied to a property Catherine owned through her trust. Their birth date, April 18th, the day Catherine always insisted they spend alone before her actual birthday. Miller explained Loretta had worked as a nurse at Sloan Kettering during Catherine's treatment. Richard remembered her quiet, capable, always one step ahead of Catherine's needs. Miller's report also revealed Catherine had set up a trust for the boys, managed by her lawyer, Robert Gladwell. Payments had stopped 6 months ago, forcing Loretta into a second job. The next morning, Richard parked outside PS 152 and watched Loretta drop the boys off. Their backpacks bounced with every step. Later, at a grocery store, a white shopkeeper accused Elijah of stealing after he tried to return a candy bar to the shelf. "I know your type," the man sneered, grabbing Elijah. Loretta intervened calmly. "My grandsons don't steal." Richard felt a sudden, unfamiliar urge to defend the boy, his boy, but held back. He was just observing, that's all. But over the following days, he couldn't unsee the signs. Ethan's crinkled nose when he laughed, the way Elijah tilted his head, like Catherine. Their spark, their resilience, the very traits that had made him fall in love with her. On the 5th day, he realized this wasn't just observation anymore. The DNA results left no room for doubt. 99.9998% probability. Richard Harrington was the father. He had built an empire by controlling every variable, yet here was a truth he couldn't reshape. 2 sons. Born in secret, raised without him. He transferred $50,000 to Loretta Williams through a shell company, disguised as leftover funds from Catherine's estate. It wasn't guilt, he told himself. Just honoring her wishes. A single call exposed Robert Gladwell, Catherine's lawyer, as a thief. He had embezzled from the boy's trust to cover gambling debts and now faced disbarment and charges. But the money was mostly gone. Richard's first direct encounter with Loretta came outside her hospital job. "Mrs. Williams," he said, extending a hand. "I believe you knew my wife." "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Harrington," she replied coolly. He claimed he was following up on Catherine's charitable commitments. Loretta remained unreadable. "Those boys are everything to me," she said. The real question lingered unspoken. Why now? Over the next 2 weeks, Richard kept finding reasons to visit Harlem. Through Loretta's guarded stories, he began to know them. Elijah, the protector, sharp and fearless. Ethan, the dreamer, lost in books and Legos, both brilliant, both thriving despite their environment. On his 4th visit, Richard brought cupcakes. When the boys came home, talk of the Natural History Museum lit up their faces. "The blue whale is real big," Ethan said, "and the dinosaur bones aren't fake," Elijah added. Richard promised to take them. The word surprised even him. That fragile bond nearly shattered when Victoria, his girlfriend, accessed his private emails. "Secret black children, Richard," she snapped over dinner. "Is this charity or something worse?" He ended things immediately. The boys didn't need her veiled contempt at a board meeting the next day. Richard listened as executives spoke about revitalizing Harlem and attracting the right element. For the first time, the language struck him as Hollaby, 'cause now, Harlem had a face. 2 of them, knowing Loretta and the twins, would soon be pushed out by rising rents. Richard felt uneasy. When Marcus Bennett dismissed concerns about a local community center, Richard, once indifferent, argued for its preservation. His sudden shift left colleagues baffled. Later, trailing the boys to school, Richard noticed things he'd once ignored. A principal who brushed past Loretta to greet white parents, a teacher who ignored Elijah's raised hand, a lunch aide who scolded the twins but not their louder white peers. Subtle, constant bias. Catherine had shielded their sons from him, but not from this. As Catherine's birthday neared, Richard learned the boys visited her grave every year, bringing sunflowers and sharing stories. What once seemed coincidence now felt like design. Catherine's final gift, guiding him toward the truth. "Would you claim your secret children or stay in the shadows like Richard?" Comment 1 if he should tell them the truth, or 2 if he should stay back for their sake. Like and subscribe for more stories that reveal the messy beauty of family. That Saturday, Richard waited outside the Museum of Natural History, nervous and unsure. He had anonymously sent Loretta museum tickets, hoping they'd come. When he saw them, Elijah and Ethan in matching green sweaters, bouncing with joy, his heart clenched. He approached, pretending surprise. "Mrs. Williams, fancy seeing you here." Loretta's cool gaze showed she saw right through him, but the boys were too excited to care. Inside the dinosaur exhibit, something shifted. Ethan bombarded him with facts. Elijah asked about fossil excavation. Their curiosity was sharp and focused like Catherine's. Then, at the planetarium, Ethan slipped his small hand into Richard's. "My mom loved stars," Elijah whispered. "She said they're like memories, old lights still finding us." Richard couldn't speak. It was something Catherine would have said afterward, forgetting his mask. Richard impulsively invited them to dinner, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a performance. Loretta hesitated at the restaurant entrance. White tablecloths, suited waitstaff, a world far from theirs. But the twins looked up at her hopefully, and she relented. Inside, Elijah carefully copied Richard's use of forks. Ethan whispered menu questions to Loretta. Richard watched, struck by how naturally they adapted. The warmth shattered when Victoria appeared at their table. "Richard, darling," she cooed, eyes flicking over Loretta and the twins. "Business dinner, was it? Or community outreach?" Elijah sat straighter. "We're not charity," he said firmly. "We're having dinner with our mother's friend." Victoria blinked. Ah, Catherine's legacy lives on, almost like she's still calling the shots. Her smile was icy. Richard stood. "That's enough. Please leave." Victoria's face hardened. "Call me when you're done with your diversity quota." As she walked away, silence hung. Ethan asked, "What's a diversity quota?" Richard faltered, but Loretta stepped in gently. "It's something people say when they don't value others who look different from them. It's not about you, it's about her." Outside, while the twins climbed into a taxi, Loretta lingered. "I know who you are," she said quietly. "Catherine told me everything." "Then why allow this?" Richard asked. "Why not tell me to stay away?" "Because Catherine believed you could change. She loved you, and those boys deserve to know where they come from, Ivan, if where they come from didn't deserve them." That night, alone in his penthouse, Richard studied old photos of Catherine. Slowly, the truth settled in. She hadn't told him about the twins, because she knew he would have rejected them. Her death forced him to confront the man himself, without excuses. The next morning, the New York Post broke the story. Harrington's secret black family splashed across the front page, accompanied by a blurry photo of Richard with the twins at the museum. Victoria's revenge was swift. Calls flooded in, his publicist, board members, friends. By noon, the company's stock had dropped 8 points. At a tense emergency meeting, CFO Winston Clark voiced what others danced around. "The optics are problematic. Richard, our investors don't like surprises." Marcus Bennett added, "Vision Capital's painting you as unstable, compromised." The subtext was clear. The scandal wasn't about betrayal or ethics. It was about them too. Black boys who weren't supposed to exist. Whispers rippled through boardrooms and cocktail circles. A powerful white CEO, linked to 2 black children. No one asked for facts. They just assumed affairs, lies, scandal. "They're not a scandal," Richard said sharply during the emergency board meeting. "They're my late wife's godchildren." The lies stung. But he wasn't ready to claim the truth, not yet. Not when he hadn't even told the boys. Though the company braced for impact, the fallout bled into his personal life. His hospital gala chairmanship, quietly revoked. His usual table at the Metropolitan Club, suddenly unavailable. Even his doorman's smile grew faint. Then came the moment that shattered the illusion. He took Elijah and Ethan to his country club after they asked about golf, something Catherine had once described. They'd barely been seated when Bernard Whitmore, an old rival, strolled over. "The servants' entrance is out back," Bernard said loudly. "Or is the help dining with members now?" Elijah and Ethan froze. They didn't understand all the words, but the hate was clear. Richard rose. "Apologize," he said coldly. Bernard laughed. "Since when do you socialize with their kind?" The slur hovered, unspoken but deafening. Richard felt something shift inside him, a line drawn. "Long overdue, their kind," he said evenly, "are children who deserve more respect than you'll ever earn." He left the club, his membership, abandoned by choice. On the drive back, Ethan asked quietly, "Are people mean to you because of us?" "No," Richard said, locking eyes with him in the mirror. "They're mean because they're afraid of what they don't understand. That's their problem, not yours." The truth hit him harder than the words. He'd been one of those people once. That night, Richard got the call. Loretta had collapsed at work. Kidney failure. She needed urgent care not covered by insurance. "I'll cover everything," Richard told the doctors. No hesitation. With Loretta hospitalized indefinitely, CPS prepared to place the boys in foster care. Richard intervened. "I'm a close family friend," he said. The social worker eyed him white, wealthy, recently scandalized. But it was better than foster placement. My penthouse has plenty of room, Richard said, ignoring the quiet fear creeping in. When the boys arrived, everything changed. The culture clash was immediate: granite counters, a silent elevator, a robotic smart home. But the most foreign part for all three of them was learning how to live together. The boys stood, wide-eyed in Richard's sleek penthouse, afraid to touch anything. That night, he found them asleep on the floor beside the guest bed, too polite, too cautious to disturb the room. In the morning, they had washed their clothes in the sink. We didn't want to make extra work, Elijah explained. It stunned Richard how aware they already were of being perceived as a burden. No child should feel that way. As he bought them clothes, books, and enrolled them in a nearby private school, backlash intensified. Vision Capital escalated their takeover bait. The board called an emergency meeting to discuss his situation, and quietly, his world shut him out. Gola invites rescinded, club memberships iced. Even his doorman's tone cooled. Then came the breaking point. The board offered a deal. They'd reject Vision Capital if Richard publicly stated the twins weren't biologically his, and limited all contact to charitable work. The statement was drafted cold, clean, devastating. 20 years ago, even 5, Richard would have signed, but the night before, he'd watched Elijah breeze through advanced math, and Ethan write a story filled with wonder. In those quiet moments, he saw what Catherine must have: a real family, and the man he still had the chance to become. I need time, Richard said. You have until tomorrow, Marcus replied. No more. As he left for the twins' school, a call from the principal pulled him into another storm. Elijah sat in the office with a bruise under his eye. Your ward was involved in a fight, the principal said coldly. We have zero tolerance for violence. Richard knelt beside Elijah. What happened? Elijah's voice didn't shake. Justin said we're only here because you paid extra. Said we're not really your family, just for show. And was Justin disciplined? Richard asked the principal. Or just my son? The word son landed like a thunderclap. The principal flinched. Her silence said everything. Richard withdrew them immediately. No paperwork. No apologies. On the ride home, Elijah asked softly, Did you mean it? What you called me? Richard looked at him in the mirror. Yes, I did. Back at the penthouse, as the boys napped off the day's weight, Richard stood at a crossroads. His father had built the Harrington Empire by exploiting Redland neighborhoods. Richard had inherited the profits and the blind spots. Catherine had tried to wake him up. Now, through the twins, that awakening had become impossible to ignore. While sorting old files on his laptop, Richard discovered a hidden, encrypted folder. Inside were Catherine's journal's entries documenting her secret pregnancy, her love for the twins, and, most painfully, her reflections on him. Our sons will show him the true measure of a manif. He lets them. Richard read 4 hours, tears blurring his vision as he saw himself through Catherine's eyes, flawed, guarded, but capable of more. That evening at the hospital, Loretta's condition had worsened. The doctor's tone was gentle, too gentle. When they were alone, Loretta gripped his hand with quiet urgency. If something happens to me, they'll need you, not your money, you. He tried to protest, but she cut him off. Catherine believed you could learn to see past color. They're your blood, but more than that, they're good souls. Promise me. Richard nodded. I promise. And, to his surprise, he meant it. That night, Ethan asked softly, Why do some people hate us? Because we're black. Richard froze. Some people are taught to fear what's different, he said. They're wrong. The world is changing, just not fast enough. But your worth, that isn't up to them. Ethan nodded slowly. Is that why you didn't want to be our dad? The question shattered him. No, he lied gently. I just didn't know about you. But he knew Ethan had seen through him. The next morning, as Richard reviewed blueprints for the Harlem redevelopment, he froze. His company's new project would demolish the twins' old school, and the very community center that had helped raise them. My empire is about to destroy the place that raised the sons I abandoned, no more. It was time to choose, his company or his children. Are you Team Richard or Team Board? Comment 1 if you think he should protect his new family. Comment 2 if you think his company must come first. If you're moved by this journey, hit like and subscribe for more stories of healing, redemption, and hard choices. The press conference, it wasn't planned, but by the time Richard Harrington stood outside Harrington Development's headquarters, the media had gathered in full force. He looked tired, vulnerable, his tie-crooked eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. Thank you for coming, he began. I want to address the rumors surrounding Elijah and Ethan Williams. A pause. The air held its breath. They are my sons. The crowd erupted shouts, cameras flashing, but Richard raised a hand. My late wife Catherine used fertility treatments. I didn't know. But that doesn't change the truth. They are mine, and I intend to be in their lives fully from now on. He left the podium without taking questions. Inside, the boardroom was silent as he entered. The fallout had begun. The boardroom was ice cold. No pretense left. You destroyed 30 years of brand equity in 3 minutes. Marcus Bennett snapped. The vote is unanimous. You're removed as CEO. Richard had expected it, but the blow still hit hard. He'd built Harrington Development into a global empire. Now he left with a cardboard box. Trailed by security guards like a disgraced intern by day's end, his corporate email was shut off. Name scrubbed from the website. Parking space reassigned. Former colleagues crossed the street to avoid him. Social invitations vanished overnight. Only his private wealth remained airtight and untouchable, shielded by legal firewalls. But the personal fallout cut deeper. The boys. Schools suggested politely that they might thrive better elsewhere. When Richard arrived to collect their things, he overheard Elijah's teacher muttering, "Scholarship kids always bring drama, especially when they're just ticking diversity boxes." Richard confronted him. "My sons are top of their class, despite educators like you. Your loss," the teacher stammered. Richard didn't wait. That afternoon, more bad news. A distant relative of Loretta's had filed for custody, arguing Richard was an unfit guardian due to cultural incompatibility. Translation: a white man shouldn't raise black boys. His lawyer warned this argument had traction in family court. Then, hate came to his door, literally. Race traitor, spray-painted across his penthouse entrance. Security footage showed 3 white men. No arrests. The doorman avoided his eyes. Friends messaged politely to distance themselves. When Loretta stabilized enough to speak, Richard updated her on the chaos, job loss, custody fight. The graffiti. "I thought I understood power," he admitted at her bedside. "Turns out it's more fragile than I ever knew." Loretta gave a tired smile. "Welcome to the other America, Richard. The one where the rules shift depending on your skin." That night, as he tucked the twins into bed, still sleeping together in one room for comfort, Ethan asked the question Richard feared. "Why did Mommy keep us a secret from you?" He hesitated, smoothing the comforter. "Because I wasn't ready to be the father you deserved," he said honestly. "She hoped I would be. Someday." Elijah, ever perceptive, looked up. "Was it 'cause we're black?" The bluntness stunned him. Already, they had words for what most adults danced around. "I was wrong," Richard said quietly. "About a lot of things. Your mom loved you enough to raise you with love until I could learn what matters." Later, Richard sat alone on the terrace, Catherine's journal open on his lap. One final entry caught the glow of city lights. The hardest lesson is that being wrong doesn't make you worthless. Refusing to change does. I hope Richard finds the boys someday. And when he does, I hope he's ready to let them teach him what I never could. Richard closed the journal with trembling hands. He finally understood as Richard closed Catherine's journal. His phone buzzed. News alert, Harrington Development, under Marcus Bennett's leadership will begin construction next month on the Harlem Project, the same site where Elijah and Ethan had learned to play chess, laugh with friends, and hear stories of resistance from elders. Soon it would be luxury. Condos starting at $2 million. Richard stared at the headline. This was the machine he'd helped build, and now it was devouring the very community that raised his children. He was adrift, too white for the black community. He'd ignored too compromised for the white world, that abandoned him the moment he stepped out of line. For the first time in his life, Richard Harrington had no title, no power, no clear next step. Only one question remained. Who would he become, now that everything that once defined him was gone? The penthouse hit the market Tuesday morning 30% under value. By Wednesday, it was sold for cash. Richard liquidated most of his assets, a trust fund for Elijah and Ethan's education, a foundation in Catherine's name to support community spaces, and a down payment on a modest brownstone in a neighborhood filled with real families, not facades. The boys watched as movers carried out the cold elegance of the old life. Their new home had creaky floors, stained glass windows, and a backyard with real dirt. "We're going to live here?" Ethan asked, peeking into the blue-painted bedroom glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. Just like Catherine had described in her journal. "It's smaller than your other house." Richard knelt beside him. "That was just a house. This is a home." Ethan smiled, already unpacking his books. Loretta, meanwhile, recovered steadily, her will to live matched by the care Richard had vowed to provide. The custody battle was complex. Richard mounted a legal defense against the distant cousin's claim, filed for formal adoption based on biological paternity, and most difficult of all began proving his commitment to honoring Elijah and Ethan's cultural identity. This journey led him to Dr. James Washington, a renowned African-American studies professor whose work Richard had found while researching education disparities. Sitting in the professor's crowded office, Richard admitted, "I need to understand what I don't know, not just in theory, but what my sons have lived through." Dr. Washington was skeptical, but Richard's sincerity softened him. Under his guidance, Richard dove into Black history, literature, and culture not as an observer, but as a father trying to raise whole, proud children. He attended community meetings, parenting workshops, and slowly built trust with neighbors. "People will question your motives," said Marcus Robinson, father of Elijah's new friend, at a weekend barbecue. "You profited from displacing communities like ours. That's not easy to forgive." Richard didn't flinch. "I can't erase the past, but I can earn trust one action at a time." That mindset shaped his response when he learned Marcus Bennett had fast-tracked the Harlem redevelopment project. Richard fought back with everything he had, launching the Catherine Harrington Foundation with a mission for equity. He hired lawyers to challenge permits, environmental experts to expose violations, and worked with alternative developers on a new proposal that preserved the community center while creating sustainable growth. Then he went public. In an exclusive business magazine interview, Richard confessed, "I was part of the problem. My privilege blinded me to the cost of so-called progress." He exposed how traditional development models masked systemic racism, using hard data from his former company's own records. When Bennett sued him for defamation, Richard's team countered with discovery demands. The case was dropped quietly. At home, Richard learned the everyday work of parenting Black children. He asked Loretta questions, watched tutorials, and practiced how to care for their hair, buy the right skincare, and talk honestly about race and self-worth. When Elijah faced subtle bias from a teacher, Richard demanded the school address it. "We don't run from racism," he told the boys. "We stand our ground. We change what's broken." Yet the greatest growth came in the small things, learning Loretta's cornbread recipe, helping with science projects, reading stories that reflected the boy's full heritage. Slowly, Richard was becoming the father Catherine had always believed he could be. Navigating Ethan's question about a slur whispered on the playground forced Richard to confront biases no diversity seminar had ever touched. These everyday challenges reshaped him. 6 months after his public acknowledgement of the twins, Loretta was released from the hospital, not fully recovered, but strong enough to move into the renovated garden apartment of their brownstone. That night, over a quiet family dinner, she raised her glass to Catherine, who saw what we couldn't. Her toast captured what Richard had come to understand. Catherine's secrets, once painful, had been acts of faith in their sons, and in his ability to grow. She had known him better than he knew himself. A year after the cemetery encounter that changed everything, Richard stood beside Loretta, watching Elijah and Ethan perform in their school play. As they took their bows, Richard's phone buzzed. His former company had settled with the Community Coalition, agreeing to preserve affordable housing and vital spaces. It was a win, but nothing compared to the pride swelling in his chest. In the backyard garden, Richard knelt beside Ethan, transplanting tomato seedlings they'd nurtured on the windowsill. Elijah worked on a science project nearby, asking questions Richard now answered with quiet care. 15 months had passed since his life had shattered, only to be rebuilt into something real. Harrington Equitable Development, the company Richard, founded 6 months earlier, thrived with a mission of community preservation and sustainable growth. It hired local residents, reinvested in schools, and attracted investors, including some who once abandoned him. Richard accepted their support without comment. His own change was too new to judge anyone else's. Inside, Loretta taught a neighborhood cooking class, fully recovered after her transplant. When the doorbell rang, Elijah brought in Miranda Chin, Richard's former assistant. She declined lemonade and sat across from him, hesitant. "I've wanted to reach out," she said, "but I was scared. I'm leaving HDC next month, and before I go, you need to see this." She handed him a sealed envelope. "Catherine gave this to me 3 weeks before everything." Paused, taking in the faces of those who had challenged, taught, and ultimately accepted him. "She believed all that," he continued, "and now I believe it too." Applause rippled through the room, not the polite kind reserved for ceremony, but something warmer, fuller, genuine. As the event continued, Elijah and Ethan ran to show Richard a mural they had helped paint, a bright scene of children playing beneath a canopy of stars. One small figure in the corner held a telescope, while another played the violin. Richard stared at it, suddenly recognizing the implication. "You think she'll come find us?" Ethan whispered, voice soft but hopeful. "Someday," Richard said, kneeling between them. "And when she does, she'll find a family already waiting." Later that night, long after the crowd had cleared and the center's lights dimmed, Richard sat alone in his office, Catherine's letter beside him. He stared at the final paragraph again, not with fear now, but quiet resolution. He didn't know when he would meet Elizabeth, but he would, when the time was right. Because love, Catherine had taught him, wasn't something you claimed with a press release or purchased with a trust fund. It was something you proved, again and again. And Richard Harrington was no longer a man who ran from love. He was a father, and fathers kept showing up, even when the path ahead was unknown. The graves we dig reminds us that healing doesn't arrive all at once. It unfolds in layers, in late-night conversations, in small acts of consistency, and in the courage to face uncomfortable truths without flinching. Richard's evolution, from a powerful but emotionally disconnected CEO to a present, accountable father, is not framed as heroic, but human. He doesn't become perfect. He becomes aware. He learns that the real legacy isn't built in boardrooms, but in bedrooms lit with glow-in-the-dark stars. in gardens where children laugh, and in the silence of a cemetery where long-buried truths are finally honored. 6 months after his public acknowledgement of the twins, Loretta was released from the hospital, not fully recovered, but strong enough to move into the renovated garden apartment of their brownstone. That night, over a quiet family dinner, she raised her glass to Catherine, who saw what we couldn't. Her toast captured what Richard had come to understand. Catherine's secrets, once painful, had been acts of faith in their sons, and in his ability to grow. She had known him better than he knew himself. A year after the cemetery encounter that changed everything, Richard stood beside Loretta, watching Elijah and Ethan perform in their school play. As they took their bows, Richard's phone buzzed. His former company had settled with the Community Coalition, agreeing to preserve affordable housing in vital spaces. It was a win, but nothing compared to the pride swelling in his chest. In the backyard garden, Richard knelt beside Ethan, transplanting tomato seedlings they'd nurtured on the windowsill. Elijah worked on a science project nearby, asking questions Richard now answered with quiet care. 15 months had passed since his life had shattered, only to be rebuilt into something real. Harrington Equitable Development, the company Richard founded 6 months earlier, thrived with a mission of community preservation and sustainable growth. It hired local residents, reinvested in schools, and attracted investors, including some who once abandoned him. Richard accepted their support without comment. His own change was too new to judge anyone else's. Inside, Loretta taught a neighborhood cooking class, fully recovered after her transplant. When the doorbell rang, Elijah brought in Miranda Chin, Richard's former assistant. She declined lemonade and sat across from him, hesitant. "I've wanted to reach out," she said, "but I was scared. I'm leaving HDC next month, and before I go, you need to see this." She handed him a sealed envelope. "Catherine gave this to me 3 weeks before everything." And Catherine, absent in body, but ever present in spirit, becomes the architect, not of secrets, but of hope. She saw not just who Richard was, but who he could be. Her quiet defiance of societal expectations created a family by intention, not convention. Her faith, documented in ink and entrusted to those who could carry it forward, becomes the quiet revolution that reshapes a man, a family, and a community. So what graves have we dug? What relationships have we buried in pride? What biases have we left unexamined? What love have we withheld, believing time would always be on our side? This story asks us not to judge Richard for the years he lost, but to reflect on the time we still have. Because in the end, what matters most isn't whether we were right in the beginning, but whether we are brave enough to become right in the end. This story reminds us that the boundaries separating U.S. race, class, culture are not immovable facts of life, but constructions we uphold through habit, fear, or silence. When we dig graves through prejudice or pride, we don't just bury our relationships, we bury pieces of our own humanity. Healing begins with a reckoning with acknowledging the harm we've done or ignored, and committing to the lifelong work of building bridges across the divides we once helped reinforce. So, ask yourself, what invisible barriers might you be maintaining in your own life? Have you ever experienced a moment that shifted your perspective on race, family, or identity, so deeply you couldn't see the world the same way again? If Richard's journey of transformation resonated with if you've witnessed someone you love grow in ways you never expected, share your story in the comments below. Has someone ever challenged you to become better, the way Catherine challenged Richard Evan from beyond the grave? If this story moved you, please tap the like button so others can discover it too. Subscribe for more powerful narratives that explore the complexities of human connection across every boundary. And if you know someone who needs a story of hope, healing, and second chances, share this video with them today. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey through the graves we dig, and remember, it's never too late to choose love over prejudice, connection over division, and growth over comfort.